Repeat signs. Everything you need to know so you don't fail music class in 7 minutes. Sheet music has a number of terms and symbols that allow for sections of music to be repeated, and even allows for jumps from one part of the piece to another. Most of these conventions probably came about to save time and resources when it was more common to write music by hand onto paper. But even today, as tablets are rapidly becoming the industry standard for musicians due to their many advantages over paper, directional markings are still commonly used because most music has a certain amount of repetition. Even a piece as simple as Twinkle Twinkle Little Star can be written in half as many bars with repeat markings. And you can certainly scale that up to larger pieces, saving tons of space on the page, making the music easier to read and even memorize, because the form and sections of the piece are way more obvious. And even on a tablet, fewer pages to turn and bars to read are generally preferred. There's a lot of symbols at first glance, but they're all pretty simple and logical, so let's jump in with the humble repeat sign. This simply means to go back to the start of the piece or movement and play all the music up to this point again, which might be useful in this piece. Since these two bars are just repeated, we can delete one repetition and add the repeat sign, and we get exactly the same thing. It's also quite common to have repeat signs in pairs, one facing forward and one facing backward, sort of like parentheses or brackets. We sometimes call them start and end repeat signs, and it just means to play the music between the repeat signs twice. If the composer wants the section to be played more than twice, they'll simply write it in text and tell you how many times it's meant to be played. There are a number of other modifications you can add to a repeat. A composer might want different instruments in the ensemble to play at different times through the same section. Almost anything is possible, but the composer will literally just tell you what to do in text. It's even possible to have an open section. This means the number of repeats isn't predefined. This might be used if someone is taking an improvised solo, and it could be longer or shorter depending on the performer and the performance. The soloist or leader will indicate when to move on either verbally or with a hand signal. And it's common in musicals when an orchestra is waiting for some action or line or joke to happen on stage. And as soon as that thing happens, the music director will give you a signal to go on to the next section. In these cases, open repeats might be referred to as a safety or a vamp, and they may include the direction to cut on cue, which is useful if something abrupt or funny is supposed to happen on stage. Next up is multiple endings. Sometimes in music, you'll see repeated sections where most of the music is the same except for the end. Multiple endings are just as simple as they sound, but sometimes sound complicated when you explain them. Just play from the top, and when you hit the end repeat sign, loop back to the beginning or the start repeat sign as indicated. Then skip the first ending and play the second ending. It's also possible to have additional repeats and endings, and they work exactly like you'd expect them to. Just repeat back as many times as necessary and play the appropriate ending each time. Similarly to before, you may see these endings combined with directions like play first time or second time only, and the composer will just write out what they want in text. Next up is bar repeats, which are slightly archaic, but you do see them from time to time, and they simply mean to play the previous 1, 2, or 4 bars again. They've largely fallen out of favor among composers and copyists, but if you ever see them, that's what they mean. Lastly, there are what we're going to call the big jump repeats. The first is da capo, commonly abbreviated as DC, which is Italian for to the head. And in this case, the head is the top, the beginning of the piece. The DC marking could appear anywhere in the piece, so you might have to go back a few bars, a few lines, or many pages, but always to the beginning. I always remember what DC means by thinking of all the other words that have similar roots and meanings, like capital or captain. Da capo, to the head, to the top of the piece. There's also something called Dal Segno, commonly abbreviated as DS, which is Italian for to the sign, and the sign is this symbol. When you see a DS, it means jump directly to the sign and continue the piece from that section. So DC means da capo, to the head, the beginning, or the top. And DS means Dal Segno, to the sign, this thing. And while these terms can stand on their own, they're often combined with either al fine or al coda. Al fine just means to play until you see the word fine, which means ending, then stop. The piece is over. So da capo al fine means you play the piece until you see the da capo, then go back to the beginning of the piece, and play until you see the fine. Then stop. And Dal Segno al fine means play the piece until you see the DS, then jump back to the sign, and play until you see the fine. Then stop. Now, a coda is a new section of the piece, usually the ending, and it works like this. If you see a da capo al coda, that means go back to the beginning of the piece and play until you see the coda sign, and then jump to the section at the end with the coda sign. If you see DS al coda, that means jump back to the sign, play until you see the coda sign, and then jump to the other section marked with the coda sign. Sometimes there are questions about when exactly to jump, so observe that the coda sign is usually placed on the bar line or near the end of the bar. Play up to the end of the bar that precedes the coda sign and then jump to the coda. Now, although these 4 markings can come in 4 different combinations, the problem doesn't tend to be remembering what they mean. The problem is that you could be jumping anywhere in the piece or even back multiple pages earlier. Finding the segno in a large piece is kind of like playing Where's Waldo. So, when you get a new piece of music, especially when sight reading, do a quick overview of the piece and notice if there's a DS or a DC and where the sign or the coda is. Sometimes I'll circle it or highlight it to make it easier to find during a performance. In my series on sight reading, this is tip number 5, inspect the piece ahead of time, which includes figuring out the roadmap of the piece. And I should note that historically, it's fairly common practice that after you jump back on a DS or a DC, you skip any first endings you encounter and play only the second endings. Double check with your teacher or music director if you're not sure what to do. They might even decide they actually prefer that you play everything every time. So now that you know how all these different repeat signs work, you should also know that they can be misused. Here's a particularly horrific example using Happy Birthday, which somehow manages to maximize confusion while saving exactly 0 bars. So, while it might be a good exercise to try to figure out exactly what's going on in this mess, to all the composers and arrangers out there, don't do this. We live in an era blessed with cut and paste and tablet computers, so sometimes it's better to just put the extra bars on the next page. And as J.S. Bach famously said, with great notational power comes great notational responsibility. Now, if you'd like to have a deeper conversation or would like some coaching on this or any other musical topic, I teach lessons online. Trumpet is my main instrument, but I've worked with all kinds of instrumentalists from all over the world on all kinds of topics. Head over to my website to get in touch and set up an appointment. And thanks to all my supporters on Patreon and channel members here on YouTube. If you'd like to support the channel and get access to a variety of additional resources, follow the links in the description. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And check my channel for videos on all kinds of other musical topics. Thanks for watching.